Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Nora Wang from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. So today, we're going to share the results and experience from the Seattle Tune-Up project. As some of you may have known, that the City of Seattle adopted the Building Tune-Ups Ordinance in 2016. And about 3 years ago, the city partnered with the U.S. Department of Energy and the National Lab to offer an accelerated tune-up process to the mid-sized buildings. We're talking about the buildings approximately 50 to 100,000 square feet. Next slide, please, Richard. So we have 4 speakers today. Nicole, Dina, Rena, and myself. Holly is a DOE project manager, and she has been overseeing the project in the past 3 years, and she will join our Q&A session. Next slide is our agenda. Nicole is the Seattle Tune-Up Accelerator manager. She will describe the Tune-Up program benefits and best practices discovered through the whole pilot process. And following Nicole's presentation, I will discuss the use of the DOE Asset Score tool in the building assessments. So I want to clarify that Asset Score is not part of the Tune-Up Ordinance. We took this opportunity to test the asset scoring tool and also look at ways to motivate building owners and managers to go beyond the minimum retuning requirements. Dina from Pineapple Hospitality and Rena from Seattle Public Schools will share their experience and perspectives as the program participants. And then Nicole will conclude the presentation at the end. Holly will hold the Q&A sessions in the last 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, and you can text us in the chat box anytime, I will answer all the questions at the very end. So next, I will turn to Nicole, and Nicole, please take away.
Great, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Great, thanks so much for the opportunity to present today. It was been a really terrific past 3 years managing this program with the support of DOE and all our wonderful project partners. So I'm going to give you some background on the program and really kind of walk you through the entire experience. I also want to just at the outset thank all the owners, properties, facility managers, and service providers that participated in this program along with us. You were really key point part of making sure this happened. So next slide, please. Okay, so building tune-ups are a key part of Seattle's climate action plan. Buildings in Seattle make up about 1/3 of our core emissions, and like many cities, we do have a goal to be a carbon neutral city by 2050. In the interim, we have a 2030 target, and that means we've got to reduce our emissions 39% from a 2008 baseline. We are making some progress. Our tracking shows that we've been reducing about 1.7% annually. But our analysis says that going forward, we need to bump that up. We really need to be more at about a 2.5% annually. So tune-ups are really part of a suite of actions that we are working on to try to meet those goals. So next slide, please. So getting a little more into building tune-ups. So building tune-up legislation. Sorry, I just had a little glitch here. Okay, here we go. Building tune-ups legislation was passed in 2016, and we passed our director's rule in 2017, and essentially it states that all commercial buildings, 50,000 square feet and greater, must complete a tune-up every 5 years or be eligible for alternative compliance pathways. I won't go through them all, but some of the alternative compliance things are like a high certified Energy Star score, LEED O&M Gold or Platinum, or an equivalent process such as if your building is already doing ongoing commissioning programs. Focus of tune-ups is really on operational and maintenance improvements, so making sure your existing equipment operates as best as it can and really fits the current needs of the building. So it's not focused on capital upgrade investments. Another way to think about tune-ups is retro-commissioning, light, and also our tune-up program, importantly, really built upon and followed some of the guidance from Pacific Northwest National Lab's Building Retuning Program. Next slide, please. So for tune-up requirements, it's really split into operating protocols and maintenance and repairs. We cover HVAC systems, lighting, water heating, and water usage. And then for maintenance repair, also including envelopes. So one of the classic things that I think everyone's familiar with for tune-ups and retro commissioning and retuning is reviewing HVAC equipment schedules, making sure that those schedules actually follow when the building is occupied and that building lights aren't on overnight, or building lights and building heating are not on overnight and on the weekend. Also, maintenance, cleaning, and repair, making sure that equipment is clean and maintained and that there's a schedule followed. Next slide, please. So tune-ups have 4 main elements. Those are, first, to conduct the building assessment. That is actually to get in a tune-up specialist, which I'll explain a little bit more in a bit on what that means. Gets into the building and identifies operational and maintenance issues. We have 35 key things that they identify. We also ask that they do a review of the benchmarking data. We do have an energy benchmarking requirement for the city, so that's a real key component, and also looking at water bills. So identifying corrective actions, if the assessment finds those things that are out of whack, need to identify them and note those so that they are implemented and corrected. So we do actually, it's not just an audit, we actually do require corrective things to happen. So there are 20 required corrective actions that would need to be completed if they are found deficient, and about 19 other things that are voluntarily can be completed. Lastly, and very importantly, those corrective actions and the changes made to address them need to be verified and reported to the City of Seattle. Next slide, please. I think there's a little delay in when the slides show up on my screen, so hopefully it doesn't seem like too long of a pause, but that's what's happening here. So for the tune-up schedule, tune-ups are rolled in over time by building size. So we started implementing them last year for the largest buildings, 100,000 square feet or greater. And as you'll see with the Tune-Up Accelerator, we were really focused on the buildings kind of highlighted in that big pink area there. Those were the buildings less than 100,000 square feet that were due in either 2020, starting this year, or 2021. I will note that due to the COVID-19 virus, the Building Tune-Ups program has issued some guidance on adjusting some deadlines a bit. So if you are needing to do a tune-up, check their website first. That's important. But these are our original deadlines. So when we were working on the tune-up requirement and getting that set, we heard a lot from building owners that there was a lot of knowledge of retro commissioning and the service provider market for buildings that were greater than 100,000 square feet. But we did not hear that as much for the smaller mid-sized buildings that was our target market for the Tune-Up Accelerator. So we really sought to think about and develop, can we come up with some sort of early compliance program to really help this market get ahead of the game and be able to get into compliance and also be prepared. And, really importantly, can we learn from this? So next slide, I'll talk more about specifically the Tune-Up Accelerator. So the Tune-Up Accelerator program, as we envisioned it, really was to target mid-sized buildings, 100,000 square feet or smaller, that would be due in 2020 or 2021. The goal really in the messaging was tune up now to meet the Seattle building requirements. And the carrot for that was financial incentives and enhanced technical support with an offer that actually sunsetted after 2018. So the goal was they all needed to complete their tune-ups by the end of last year. Everybody did, so it's great. And our goal was an average of 20% energy savings across at least 100 buildings and about 99 million kBTU in savings. Now, as you can see, that 20% savings is a little higher than our 10 to 15% estimate for tune-ups. So I'll talk more about that in a moment, too. So next slide. So in 2016, we took this idea to the Department of Energy, and we were really lucky to receive an award from the US DOE Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy under the Buildings Program. We received federal funding of about $1.2 million for project oversight and to run this program. So thank you, Department of Energy. We definitely could not have done this without you. We matched that with about $1.8 million of our local funding. So for our program partners, my department kind of led the charge on it with program management, coordinating with the Building Tune-Ups mandate, also doing evaluation and reporting. We also worked very closely with our local Smart Building Center, who supported the program on provider training and developing a tune-up curricula, a tool lending, project tracking, and a help desk. Also worked closely with Nora's team at the Pacific Northwest Laboratory to provide the Asset Score, which Nora correctly noted was kind of an add-on for this program, but not originally part of the mandate. And also with the team that works on the building retuning training, also using some of their research on energy savings from tune-ups as well. Seattle City Light was a really big partner and important for our incentives for the tune-ups. Theirs was all local match. And we also worked very closely with the University of Washington Integrated Design Lab to offer additional support beyond the tune-up to really engage people who completed in a tune-up in work beyond the tune-up, maybe getting them more towards strategic energy management. Next slide, please. So we had a fourfold program approach. The first goal was to advance market support for tune-ups. And what we did there was we worked with tune-up service providers to offer trainings. We'll talk more about those in a second. We also, as I mentioned before, we're working to accelerate tune-ups in the mid-sized buildings primarily through incentives and owner engagement. The third part was to generate voluntary action towards greater savings. How can we push some of those buildings and give them extra support to go beyond the tune-up? And lastly, really making sure that since we're doing this early program, how can we learn from that and make sure that the tune-ups mandate is effective for the small building? So part of what we're doing right now is we're finalizing the program, is really making some recommendations going forward. I am pleased to say we didn't see any sort of giant things that we thought, oh, we got to change that. In general, what we're seeing is tune-ups is going quite well. So talking more about the program development on the next slide, please. So there was a lot of work to create the program. First, we had to really work to create the incentive program with Seattle City Light. That was developing incentive agreements and reporting forms. We had to define the program paths and the brand. One of the challenges here was that we were rolling out the mandate to the largest buildings at the same time as we were rolling out this early incentive offer to smaller buildings. So how did we link with the mandate approach, but also define the Tune-Up Accelerator as something unique and different? Also had to plan and recruit buildings. We used the Asset Score for some of that building's prioritization. And we had to develop program and customer tracking methods, and that was help with a database from the Smart Building Center. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay. So we kicked off the program with the Tune-Up Specialist trainings in 2017. Our goal was to have 5 service providers up and ready to be tune-up specialists. And the tune-up specialist is really the person that can do the tune-up, do that, both the assessment portion and sign off on the final report. So in our mandate, that means that they need to have 7 years of experience, including educational, professional experience with commercial building operations. And they also have to have one of several different certifications. I won't read them all off, but for example, one of them is a certified energy manager, certified commissioning professional, or like a professional engineer in mechanical or architectural engineering. So they do have to have some specialty. They do not have to be an external service provider. If a building owner has their own staff or retro-commissioning staff and they are qualified, they can conduct tune-ups. And you'll actually hear a bit from Rena from Seattle Public Schools. Their staff was able to do tune-ups in their facilities. So with the trainings, we had 85 service providers attend. Our original goal was to have 5 firms to be able to include on our Tune-Up Accelerator provider list. We ended up with 30, so that was exciting to see that kind of engagement with this program. And the end, we had 16 firms that actually completed Tune-Up Accelerator projects. So we also had a really nice distribution of tune-ups across different service provider firms, and also across for the public schools, as I mentioned, with their internal work, and also the King County did a building internally as well. Next slide. So getting more into what were the incentives and the program paths that were developed, we tried to develop 3 different program paths through this. The first being a basic tune-up, which was an incentive created by Seattle City Light of up to 12 cents per square foot for a tune-up that met the building tune-up requirements. That was capped at 70% of the total project cost. We also, through that and through some of the voluntary actions that are in the tune-up, we're really trying to engage and encourage building owners to do what we'd call a tune-up plus, which was you completed the basic tune-up, but maybe you found a lighting opportunity and engaged in an existing incentive from Seattle City Light for lighting, HVAC, or other programs that they may already have. Third, we also had the building renewal path with the University of Washington Integrated Design Lab, and that was support from them, technical support, for deeper investments like renovations or tenant improvements, and they had 3 different levels of support. Next slide, please. Okay, so where did we end up with projects enrolled? So we had a goal of 100 projects, and we actually ended up in completing 102, so just slightly over our goal. We did originally have many more enrolled, about 115 or so at the max, but some dropouts due to ownership or management changes that happened. That's not unexpected with incentive programs. From the chart, we also were able to complete 90 asset scores in the buildings, and that's slightly less than the total enrolled because some of the buildings enrolled just were not really buildings that worked very well with the asset score model, but 90 is still fantastic. And in the end, had 20 tune-up accelerator summaries approved. And so those, just for note, those summaries are really exactly the same requirements as the mandates. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about who from the market participated. So those 102 buildings was equivalent to nearly 7 million square feet of real estate in the city of Seattle with an average of about 67,000 square feet in size. The bulk of our participants really did fall in that 50 to 100,000 square foot size range. But interestingly, we did have about 11 buildings that were smaller than 50,000 square feet whose owners said, hey, this looks like a great opportunity. I'd like to do a tune-up too. And we did allow them to enroll. We also had a handful that were just slightly over 100,000 square feet as well. Usually they were paired or partnered in a campus with a smaller building, so it made sense to allow them to enroll as well. Next slide, please. So for participant buildings by type, we had a really nice range of different types of buildings, and it was fairly close to the types of buildings that are in our market for 50 to 100,000 square feet. So about a little more than a quarter office, great representation from K through 12 schools, and you can see this other mix here, roughly parallels our market. I think I forgot to mention that originally there are about 400 buildings in the 50 to 100,000 square foot market. So we had roughly 25% of those who would need to tune up participate. Next slide, please. So for participant ownership, we also had a good mix of private, municipal, and not-for-profit owned. You can see in the yellow piece of the pie there, about 44 were private or 44% were private or for-profit ownership. We had about 8% not-for-profit owned, and a good chunk of municipal, about a quarter of the buildings were municipally owned. We did actually make an extra effort to try to recruit not-for-profit buildings to enroll, and we're actually able to increase that somewhat. I think originally we only had a couple buildings, and we did add on through that extra outreach. I think that for future programs, that type of outreach is really important. Next slide, please. So for our goal projects on the left side of this chart, our original goal was we thought maybe 40 buildings would only do a basic tune-up, and that might be around a 10% energy savings. 40 buildings, additional 40 we thought would do the tune-up plus some sort of incentive program. And 20 we might get to some level of building renewal. In the end, on the right side of the chart, we ended up a little bit different than that. We had 48 just do the basic tune-up. About 19 did tune-up plus the city light incentive. Sometimes it is hard to attribute if the tune-up led them to do the incentive, but we were able to link that many projects. Interestingly, though, we did have this kind of chunk in light green there of buildings that kind of went beyond the basic tune-up, but didn't really necessarily engage in incentive programs. So they may have done some things like some extra air sealing in their buildings that was voluntary, or some insulation, or maybe did a very small lighting project that they just didn't quite qualify for an incentive. So we're not sure kind of what those savings might be. And then we had 5 buildings engage in the building renewal program, but interestingly, all of them really went through and had a complete and very detailed strategic energy management plan for future work. So we thought that was actually a great outcome. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about on the next slide. What was tuned up? So of these 102 buildings, we tracked every single tune-up that came in, and we've done some analysis on what was found and corrected. So these are the top 6 of the 20 required measures. We are going to be publishing a final report that will have details for every single measure, but that's a lot for a slide, so just treat you to the top 6 here. So equipment schedules for HVAC, not surprisingly, 58% of these buildings, they were found to be deficient and were corrected. Set points was another common thing in nearly half the buildings. And you can see it's all HVAC here on the top required measures. So I'll give a second for folks to look at that. And then we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so on the top voluntary measures, probably no surprise to folks out there that inefficient lighting is still pretty prevalent out there. So 64% found that. For these, because they're voluntary, we tracked if they were found and then also if they were corrected or planned to be corrected in the relatively short term. So about 20% are correcting that. If you're a provider out there, you might think, hey, there's some opportunity here in this market. Also saw quite a bit of equipment that is towards end of service life. It's pleased to see those are often more expensive upgrades, but 10% are making plans to correct those. So much more of a mix here: lighting sensors, some water flow fixture opportunities, ventilation issues. So quite a range of different things in our voluntary. And again, our entire list will be in our final report. Okay, next slide, please. So moving on to those buildings, there were about 19, as I mentioned, that did an energy conservation measure in that tune-up plus category, getting a city light rebate. So again, not surprisingly, most of those were in the lighting, lots of LED lighting opportunities, but we did have some working on some HVAC equipment and controls work. Had one project do a full retro commissioning in their facility and one VFD project. Next slide, please. So the Building Renewal program offered 3 different levels of support. I'm not going to be able to go into those in great detail, but the first level was to create a Spark report and provide that for free to building owners. Spark works best with office-type buildings, and it's a tool developed by the NIA program, NIA Better Bricks. So they ran 38 Spark reports. About 11 of those had a positive net present values, and we actually delivered those to the building owners. While those didn't result in a lot of additional engagement with the program, it really gave us a fantastic opportunity to look at what is the opportunity in this market. And what the Integrated Design Lab found was that if all the measures were completed as recommended by those reports, the average EUI could be reduced 47%. So I think, again, this is really just showing that there is incredible opportunity beyond the tune-up in this market. And just moving to the next slide. a quick visual of what a Spark report looks like. Integrated Design Lab was able to build upon the asset scores that were collected for each of the buildings, port those into the Spark report, and then add some financial data. What they used was mock financial data to be able to run these reports and then provide them to the building owners for free. So move on to the next slide. So our original offering with Building Renewal did have kind of a middle ground of something in between a Spark report and a full strategic energy management plan. But we didn't have anyone kind of engage at that level. Everybody just wanted to go right to level 3. So we had 5 buildings that participated in this level 3 report. So next slide, please. So level 3 really provided a full measure package analysis for each of the 5 buildings that participated. We had a medical office, a financial office, a hotel, and 2 K-12 public schools participate. So just looking at this slide, I know there's a fair amount on there, but the measure packages really went from a basic O&M type of work, which on average for these 5 buildings might get 16% savings, all the way through kind of low-hanging fruit, retrofit, deeper mechanical work, and then finally a full electrification of the building. So this also showed the potentials of a 16% to 56% energy savings, reducing the average EUI from 71 down to 41. And if all these were implemented, a total direct emission savings of up to 900 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. So also showing a lot of opportunity. We are seeing some implementation, especially in the financial office, has been sort of moving through this. And it's important to keep in mind that these were envisioned as really 10-year plans. So we're not expecting that this work would be done within the time frame of the accelerator. It's really offering a strategic energy map for the future for these buildings. So next slide, please. We also have done evaluation work on the program to date. So the Smart Building Center took the lead on this, doing an on-site evaluation in 10 sample buildings that participated in the program. We tried to use a representative sample. They did both site visits and some post-energy data analysis. So next slide. So for the site visits, they went into all 10 buildings, did interviews with the building owners or facility managers, and in many cases, the tune-up specialists as well. They did a visual verification of the corrective actions. In some areas, they used data loggers to verify that corrective actions were working if they were done via controls. And we found great measure persistence throughout. Of those, I think only one of the required measures was found to not persist, and it was a schedule override in a place where it was a very kind of public thermostat. They were able to just fix it on site. So overall, we really felt that the managers and the service providers were very much accurately doing the tune-up and presenting the results on their forms. So next slide. So for our energy data analysis in the buildings, this was a little more complicated, but we looked at energy emissions changes with both a 1-year and a 2-year gap. In the end, we went with a 2007 baseline compared to 2019, using the same pre and post months. And for our emissions, we used the Seattle greenhouse gas factors, accounting for them being a carbon neutral utility. So there were a number of challenges with this. The first was that we had to address any unexplained data gaps and dips in some of the buildings. There was a big range of implementation timelines. This was set up as a program, not a research study, so not everybody had a start and stop date that was in sync. But we were able to kind of choose a broad time frame to look at the pre and post data. But right now we've got a challenge of, for post tune-up data, some of the buildings we looked at only had about 4 months available. So we do plan to update this data this year when we can, and then we'll hopefully be able to update our results. And currently we didn't feel we had quite enough post data to do weather normalization, but we'll plan to do that in the future too. So for the next slide, has some of the energy savings. So there's a lot on here, but I would just ask you to kind of zero in right on the pink bar in the middle there. So when we looked at the energy savings in these 10 buildings, some did have some slight increases, but most had decreases. So for total energy, we were looking about at 8% savings. GHG emissions using the Seattle factors was about 8.3. And you can see actually a little bit higher on natural gas savings at about 11% versus electric at about 5.5%. So again, on the far right column, we've got the months of post-tune-up energy data. So it's a little skimpy on some of those months. So we are going to update that. So treat these numbers as very preliminary. I think they will definitely change. Next slide, please. So since we had the close relationship with Pacific Northwest National Lab and their retuning program, and they have a great body of research already on retuning savings, we were able to do, in addition to our M&D sample, a crosswalk between their work and the prevalence of measures in our tune-up program. So we were able to do this with 71 of the buildings that completed the tune-up. And we were able to map about 8 of our required tune-up measures. If you're wondering why there are fewer measures, it's because in our tune-up we do have some of the water measures, and there's not quite a one-on-one match for all of the HVAC type measures. But nonetheless, what we found when P&L did this was that the predicted savings ranged from about 3.8% to about 11.2% for the building types. And that's on the right side of your chart here. And if we were able to extrapolate that to all the buildings, we would get a total energy savings of about 7.5%. So it was kind of interesting to see that not be that far off from what we found with our M&D at this point in time. Again, this is a very rough estimate, but it was an interesting crosswalk to do, and I think added some additional complexity and information that we could glean from our tune-up program. So now we're going to shift back to Nora for just a few minutes. She's going to talk about in more detail about how we use the asset score with this program, and then I'll come back and do some conclusions.
While we're waiting to get connected, let's. I think we'll skip ahead here just and we'll come back to Nora. Sorry about this. Dina is all set. We can talk about her participation. Thank you.
This is Dina Balan. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate for a boutique hotel brand based in the Seattle area called Stay Pineapple. We have 10 hotels throughout the U.S. With 4 of them here in the Seattle area. We enrolled all 4 of our hotels in the Building Tune-Up Accelerator program. Kind of our perspective behind that was we had to do this anyway. We had to comply with the BTU rules eventually, so we might as well make the most of it. So we actually ended up working beyond the tune-up program. Some of the additional elements that were discussed, we participated in as well. Just to give you an idea of what our buildings look like, we have a variety of the 4 buildings. They're 48,000 to 96,000 square feet in space. Energy Star scores from 25 to 95, old buildings to newer buildings with all different types of systems. We are not like Marriott. We don't build, we buy, and our buildings are unique. Each building is unique. We spent about $65,000 total in our program and received about 45% of that back in incentives, so about $30,000. The remaining cost to us was about $25,000 for the total program for all 4 buildings. And we got about $36,000 in first-year savings. So we had less than a 1-year payback on our investment for the project. That is all really good and a great benefit. We were very excited about that. However, I think there are some other less obvious benefits that I would like to walk everybody through that we found really exciting for our team. One of the best was really staff engagement, getting our property managers and teams more attuned to caring about the energy consumption of their building. You can imagine as a hotel, guest experience is always the highest priority for our operations teams. So energy efficiency is not always at the top of their mind. So keeping them engaged in that process and getting them to understand how their building systems work and trying to improve that was a big benefit for us. We determined a champion for the project, and then we also determined a champion at each building. And I also recommend to anybody participating that you engage your green team into this project. And if you don't have one, this is a great way to create a green team. Use this as a excuse or impetus to create that green team. The other really important element to us was a tune-up specialist that was really excited and integrated and engaged in the process. We used a local company, Sweek Engineering, and they did an amazing job really not just going out and inspecting the buildings, but also engaging with our teams and doing a lot of training and extra effort. So that was a huge benefit, and I would highly recommend to anybody that is hiring a consultant that they talk a lot about what those services are that will be provided, not just the bare minimum of investigating the building, but also engaging with your team members that operate the building. We had a lot of success with our more complex buildings. This was kind of an interesting element for us, I think. Our Maxwell Hotel, which is in South Queen Anne, has a building automation system, has a significant amount of common mechanical systems, large mechanical versus what we call dumb independent units, PTAX, or those kind of things that if you're not used to hotels, that's that wall unit that sticks out on the exterior wall of the building. So the Maxwell Hotel was definitely a better economic model for us. We were able to really attack our building management system, which we had been very unhappy with and had difficult time managing it. Through the process, our team was able to track, well, first they put our building management system on the cloud through a portal, which hadn't been that way before. So I can see it from our home offices, our consultant can see it, as well as our maintenance team. They tracked the changes that were made in real time and were able to adjust over a number of months the theory of what we thought would improve the energy efficiency and then the reality, because they could see the information as the changes were made. So that was really exciting. It also improved our guest comfort significantly, which is one of the biggest benefits for us as a hotelier, is really maintaining a comfortable building. So that was something everybody thinks about energy efficiency, but in addition to it being more efficient, we actually have better comfort in the building. We really did not look at energy efficiently myopically. We wanted to look at it against all of the other benefits, such as good indoor air quality and elements like that. One of the other big benefits for us was really repair work, making the most of ensuring that all of repairs that were supposed to be getting done were getting done, our preventative maintenance programs were being done appropriately, or what elements needed to be changed to those preventative maintenance programs, which there were some significant changes. Again, a good bit of this was outside of the pure letter of the law of the Building Tune-Up program. It was adjacent maybe. So that was exciting. We found a lot of things like that. The Building Tune-Up project really gave us a roadmap for the next few years as well for our CapEx projects, as in addition to all the low and no cost measures that we did through the program that gave us, a less than 1 year payback on them. we now have a roadmap for the next 4 or 5 years to where we want to invest funds and where those investments will be most advantageous. So that has been a huge benefit for us. We're also taking that outside of Seattle, and we have 6 hotels around the country, and so we're extrapolating that information from these 4 hotels out to our other hotels and are able to create some roadmaps for those properties as well. So it really has been a huge success for us from start to finish. The best advice I can give anybody, though, is to lean into it and not just do the minimum. And really, you got to do it anyway, so you might as well make the most of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dina. We're actually going to move to hear from Rena from Seattle Public Schools next. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rena. I am a resource conservation specialist at Seattle Public Schools. And you can see on the slide there's 3 of us, Graham Goodman and Ian Brown. And in the bottom picture is our team of retro commissioners. So they were hired specifically to tune up buildings, and it is their work that the resource conservation specialists support. So Seattle Public Schools is one of the largest building owners in Seattle, and so we have over 100 buildings. 30 of them were required in the tune-up program, but we added an additional 22 buildings in this Accelerator program. So the resource conservation team kind of tracks energy and water and all of the utilities, and we work with the retro commissioners so that they can figure out where the work needs to be done. And they went in, and as Dina mentioned, taking a little bit further, leaning in and going, doing more than what's required. That's one of the differences, too, between paying for an outside company to come in to look at your buildings versus having an inside team. So instead of just the small percentage of checking on the systems, we check 100%. So all the relays, all the filters. And the other important aspect is that our retro commissioners oftentimes fix those issues as they find them. So the larger issues, some that might require more equipment or parts, they can submit a work order. But they were, having come from mechanical background, they were able to handle a lot of those problems on the fly. So we were able to recognize savings pretty much right away. And some of the other things, too, is that Dina also mentioned is that sometimes those deficiencies that are noted, when fixed, they're more about occupant comfort and not as much about energy savings. So we're trying to make sure that we're saving energy, but also that the children are in the best learning environment possible. So this particular case study, we worked on Concord Elementary, and it's a pretty old building that had several different construction projects over the years to modify it and update it. And so there was a lot of different kinds of systems that we were working on, but some of the things that they found would be just making sure the coils are cleaned and filters installed and changed properly. But we also take a look at the deficiency list that the retro commissioners create and make a plan for fixing those deficiencies in the long term. So looking at things that we can repair right away, and then others that are going to require some larger capital investment down the line. So we've really appreciated this opportunity to operate our buildings in a better way. We were already doing a pretty good job, but this allowed us to tighten things up and really get into those nooks and crannies and find those hidden problems that aren't necessarily so obvious when you just run a report. So it's great to have our teams out in the buildings physically touching all the different systems and reporting back on it.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much for that information, Rena. We're going to circle back now to Nora from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory.
I'm going to take a few minutes to share some high-level findings we received from incorporating Asset Score into the Tune-Up Accelerator program. In case some of you are not familiar with Asset Score is a national standard tool for assessing the physical and then the structural energy efficiency of commercial and multifamily buildings. It generates a simplified energy efficiency reading that enables comparison among buildings regardless of its occupancy and operational choices. So you can think there are two buildings that occupy differently. They may receive different portfolio manager score from the Energy Star program, and then when you model them and normalize their occupancy, plug load, schedule, set point, and you get actually the true asset efficiency. In this case, you see the current score of 6, and also there's a potential score of 9.5. That's automated energy efficiency measure calculation program that identifies the opportunities for you to invest in building upgrades, and then the tool is 100% free. The next slide shows that how we participated in the program from the very beginning. Asset Score also have a function called preview. We further minimize the input requirements, can be as few as 5 to 7 building inputs. Most of them are available from benchmarking program. If you plug into this Asset Score preview, which supports batch analysis, you can upload thousands of buildings. That's what we did with Seattle. And trying to prioritize those buildings, right? As I mentioned in the previous slide, when you look at the actual energy use, you have no clue if those buildings have good asset or not. You can look at a construction year. Maybe it's a good indicator. Newer buildings is generally more efficient, but that's not always the case. Now you have different use types, right? You have hotels, schools and offices. In many cases, they're mixed-use buildings. They do not even get a Energy Star score in some cases if their use type doesn't not qualify. So this provides actually a great way to look at those buildings. So we run analysis of 2,600 buildings from the Seattle benchmarking program. We plot the preview, which is the model UI, against the actual UI. At least you can see the distribution. When a building has lower EUI from model than measured, that means that building has good asset and operation. If that building has a high UI from both model and measured, this likely has need to be retrofitted and potentially be retuned too. And then similarly, you can see the other two quadrant analysis. This is just an example showing 466 office buildings, and you may wonder why the building is clustering against like 3 vertical lines. That's because really the preview model is based on the large-scale simulation, a regression model generated from that stock modeling. So the stock model is kind of constrained by what HVAC system we can model within like a limited amount of time. So next slide. So after the 90 building asset score reports return back, we're able to actually plot the actual asset score created by the assessors and the Energy Star score. So we want to see when those two scoring systems use side by side, how can we retrieve useful information about the building efficiency. I want to emphasize that the relative position of a building on the two scales is the focus of this analysis rather than the direct score comparison. Because asset score and portfolio manager score is a different scoring system. So 5 and 50 is not absolutely meaning the same, but we both align with feedback data. So there is some sort of like underlying agreement. But our CBAC is our model version of the CBAC, and we have lots of publications. We want to learn more about how the asset score was actually created. So in this case, rather than put the buildings into 4 quadrants, actually we study the trend, right? Where is the building relatively located on the map? Does it have better asset or better operation? In the next slide, we use 2 case studies, and this is the first case study, and showing a building has extremely low asset score and high portfolio manager score. And the conclusion is that's a target for retrofit, right? And we verify that using the field assessment report from the tune-up specialist as well as the asset score recommendations. And you can see all of the recommendations, most of them are focusing on asset improvement. And similarly, the next slide shows another building that has high asset score, 8.5, and a low portfolio manager score. So we presume that building is a better target for retuning and operational improvement. And then we went back and looked at the field assessment results and asset score recommendation, and you can see that the assessors did recommend more about scheduling, setback, the control, even if the building does have some further improvement opportunity in lighting economizer. And then the assessors also noted that the HU near the end of useful life. So I think I have one more slide, and then I'll turn back to Nicole. Thank you. So looking at the 90 buildings, we have asset score results, and we compare the automated recommendations against the actual recommendations from the field assessors. Just want to see, are we giving the same recommendations or close enough recommendations? So you can see that pretty much we're very pleased by the results. The top recommendations from both ends, the gradient line, as expected, lighting retrofit is still the highest one. And then you have the HVAC control and lighting control. And after that, you can see the HVAC equipment or system upgrades. And we also noticed that a lot of assessors do not recommend envelope installation, but asset score does, because we have the data to run the cost-effective analysis for our models, but usually the envelope installation is considered more higher cost, and then it's difficult to estimate the savings without running more intense analysis. I think that's all I want to share today. We do have more detailed analysis. We're planning to publish results in technical papers. If you're interested, you can leave your email here. We're happy to share that with you once those publications are out. Now I'm going to turn back to Nicole to conclude the presentation, then we can move to questions and answers.
Hi, everybody. This is Nicole again. Thank you so much, Nora and Dina and Rena as well. So we also did a post-participation survey of building owners and managers. We had about 50% response, great response rate. And we also found that, like Dina and Rena, they were pretty satisfied with the program. We're running short on time, so I'm just going to kind of hone in on our last check mark here. One of the things we heard really strongly was that offering an incentive and technical support for early compliance is a good policy. So something for cities and states to think about. This really is a way to engage people early and hopefully get additional savings from policies like these. Also, shout out to the tune-up specialists. We had really great feedback about how well all of you were doing conducting the tune-ups. So next slide, please. We track tune-up costs, and thank you to City Light. This is a whole lot of paperwork for them to try to sort through this and provide this info to us. Originally, with the 12 cents per square foot, we thought that might cover about 50% of the tune-up costs, and City Light was pretty much spot on. We found that on average, tune-ups for Tune-Up Accelerator were costing about 21 cents per square foot. And there was some difference among building types. At this point, it could be more related to ownership than type, but in any case, it's coming in around 21 cents per square foot. And that's for the whole thing, from the assessment through the implementation cost. And that's not including additional work beyond the tune-up. So next slide, please. So we have been working to revise our savings estimates. We were originally looking at trying to get a 20% total savings estimate from this program. Right now, we think we're probably closer to 12%. That's looking at the lower green cloud. So we revised that down a bit. But again, as I mentioned, our estimates are really preliminary. I think as many of you know, it's very hard to track O&M savings. So we're going to kind of keep looking at this over time. But in general, maybe a little less, but also still, I mean, pretty great savings. And also, as Rena and Dina noted, also all the non-energy benefits were extremely important through this program. So last slide here, I think. So where are we going next beyond our tune-ups? Just giving a second for that slide to come up. Okay, great. So, you know, I made this slide before we had this thing called COVID-19 come bouncing around the planet. But in any case, we still have Washington State Building Performance Standards that we're looking at, you know, how does that affect Seattle? How do we link that in with tune-ups in the future? We know we need to continue to work towards our climate action goals. So do we have future performance standards? We're all obviously reevaluating this in the light of the recent changes. We still have a Green New Deal, though. One of the things we're looking really closely at, as are other cities, are, you know, what kind of increased support can we have? Can we have retrofit accelerator type hubs? Can we have financing programs? We are also looking to pilot a retrofit accelerator in the coming months and years. So we'll be issuing out more information on that as we develop those programs. And I'll do the next slide here. So I think we're at the point where we can ask questions, but if you do, I know we're running short on time, if you do have a question and you want to shoot that to me by email, that would be fine too, or please also check our website, seattle.gov/building tune-ups. So thank you so much.
Hi everybody, this is Holly Carr, and we do have a few, well, quite a number of questions that have come in. I recognize it's 1 o'clock. Completely understand if folks need to hop off and go to your next Zoom call or webinar, but I will go ahead and ask a few questions of our panelists. Nicole, quite a number of questions coming in, obviously, about your program directly. First one, quite broad. What common barriers to participation from building owners were identified, if any?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest barrier is, especially in this mid-sized market, is just time and capacity. Certainly there's a funding and a budgeting barrier, but a lot of it is if you're not necessarily a professionally managed building, is just finding that time to learn about the program, apply for the program. That's a big one, and that's the kind of hurdle where when we think about things like hubs and retrofit accelerators, that those types of programs we hope can address.
Great, thank you. We did have a question regarding the Spark reports per se, actually a number of questions on the Spark reports. This one says, if only 11 of 38 Spark reports showed a positive return, what did the other 27 reports show, and did anything happen with those 27 reports?
That's a good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I could pass that on to my colleague Chris at the Integrated Design Lab. But the other 2017 just, basically didn't show a positive return. One of the challenges with the tool is that it is most geared towards commercial, at least office space. So it may have been that some of those ones where it didn't work very well with, we were kind of stretching the building type with that one. So I think that was the issue for some of them. I'm honestly not sure for the rest. So that is something I can shoot that email, or if you're really interested in the Spark report, send me an email and I can get you in touch with Chris on that.
And another question, Nicole, related to the current COVID crisis and how, if and how that is impacting Seattle's ability to conduct the audits, and if there's a virtual audit option available?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So there's not a virtual audit option available, but all our reporting services through the Seattle Services Portal are all online. So, you know, if you've nearly completed your tune-up, you can submit that without having to, well, you can maintain your social distance. But we have responded to this problem with changing the deadlines for the upcoming tune-ups. So we've extended grace periods for buildings that may be overdue at this point, and we've also extended the deadline for the next buildings coming along in the hope that, you know, this problem will be resolved. But obviously, we will continue to monitor that. So I'd encourage you to go to the Building Tune-Ups website to look at what those upcoming deadlines have been changed to.
Great, thank you. And just to be respectful of our time here, I think we're going to close out the webinar. We'll leave the slide here on Nicole's email. We certainly encourage folks to reach out directly to City of Seattle with specific questions on implementation and their experience. And I just want to thank all of our webinar participants, Nicole and the Seattle team, and PNNL, and certainly our building owner participants for their incredible work on this project. It's really been a wonderful project for DOE to be involved in, and tremendous results that we hope will inform future work across the country. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.